Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off, because today I'll be reviewing and paging through Jackals from Osprey Games. Is this D100 Light Fantasy Bronze Age Sword and Sorcery role-playing game worth a purchase? Or is this simply a feeble attempt to knock the current king, Runequest and Glorantha, from its Bronze Age throne? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be reviewing Jackals from Osprey Games. This is written by John Matthew DeFogie, with artwork provided by John McCambridge and Randy Musso. This 272-page hardcover carries an MSRP of $35. Can be snagged in PDF over at Drive-Thru RPG for $24.50. But because, got to be honest, there's so little difference in price, if you're going to pick up Jackals, I got to recommend grabbing the hardcover. All right, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I have Jackals. Now, this is a smaller hardcover book. This is not your usual 8.5 by 11. So this is a bit smaller. I don't have massive hands, so. But before I dive into this, I do want to mention that the fine folks over at Osprey Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share my thoughts about this game with you. It's important that you understand that, especially these days. All right, let's take a look at the back here. So, first of all, I do want to point out it's Osprey, so we know we're going to get some pretty good artwork. And we'll talk a little bit about the artwork as we take a peek through here. But looking at the back, it tells us, Jackals is a role-playing game of Bronze Age sword and sorcery set in the land of the Zerarets, known as the Land of Risings. Inspired by the myths, cultures, and history of the ancient Near East, and by such texts as the Iliad, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Old Testament, the Zerarets is rife with monstrous creatures, cruel beast folk, and the ruins of the ancient civilizations that came before. Play as Jackals, mighty warriors, and cunning ritualists, welcomed and distrusted in equal measures by the people of the land, and discover the secrets of the past, stand against the forces of chaos, and make your mark upon history. All right, we're going to jump on in here. Do want to point out that I am going to stay picture-in-picture up here. So I am going to be cutting a little bit of the pages off. And I am not going to look at every single page in here as well. So to try to keep those pirates at bay. All right, so we're going to jump on in here. Do want to mention the production quality, really, really nicely done. The paper stock is top notch. I mean, Osprey's known for their books. Let's be honest. And they have been around for a long time. Anybody who paints any historical miniatures is very familiar with Osprey. And they did start to branch out into gaming just a few years ago. I did review Paleomythic, which is one of the first, I think that was the first role-playing game that Osprey released, and I really liked it. So we're going to jump on into the contents here. So we get some of the artwork. There is not tons of artwork. As we get into the bestiary, you'll see that as well. But there's enough artwork to keep you relatively inspired and get those creative juices flowing as well. The game rules themselves are pretty easy, especially if you are familiar with percentile dice-based games, D100 games. This is going to come pretty easily to you, except there are some interesting wrinkles that I will mention as well. One of the first things I know most people are wondering about is if they already have RuneQuest, if they already have any sort of role-playing in Glorantha, Bronze Age role-playing games, why would they even take a look at this? Well, you may, and I will discuss that. Also, do want to point out, if you are interested in kind of a Bronze Age sword and sorcery sort of game, you might consider taking a peek at this as opposed to RuneQuest. And I will discuss that as well when I wrap up with some final thoughts and my review score. All right, so we get into basically what is this world? What is this location? This is sort of a Middle Eastern flair to the proceedings here as well. But once again, it's kind of based on the mythology of the Near East, not necessarily the Middle East, but I actually do dig the vibe that this is providing. So we have various different cultures. So this is not a role-playing game that has, elves and dwarves and halflings. So you're going to have your variations of abilities for the humans based on their culture. So we get an overview of their culture's specific virtues that somebody in that culture will possess, as well as some magical like backgrounds, a little bit of history. So for an example, what kind of appearance do these people normally have? What are the typical jackals? Because you don't have character classes normally in a D100 game. So it's giving you an idea of what are the sorts of jackals from these cultures, what would they normally be? One thing to point out about the jackals as well is that you could kind of look at them along the lines of mercenaries or janissaries. And I do find it kind of interesting because, in a way, one of the first things, even though it's not Bronze Age, one of the first things that kind of popped into my head reading through this is the Magnificent Seven, or the Seven Samurai, where townsfolk, the locals, they're kind of in awe of the jackals. But then again, once the jackals have done what they've asked them to do, it's sort of like, all right, you can move along now. Get out of here. So I thought that was kind of cool. All right, so we're just kind of taking a peek at some of these. We get character creation. Pretty easy. You're going to choose your culture. You're going to decide, are you going to be a ritualist, which is essentially a magic user? This is a setting where it is not high fantasy. This is kind of historically based, and the magic is, I don't want to say low magic, because there are some pretty powerful rituals in this game, but it really does draw from classic sword and sorcery, where not everyone has a knowledge of magic, and magic can corrupt. There is chaos in this game, and chaos can corrupt characters as well. So we've got our attributes. We've got strength, deafness, vitality, courage, wisdom, and devotion. So kind of your standards. So we've got generating skills. And one of the aspects of this is that you are going to actually have a point spend that you're going to utilize. You are not just sitting there rolling up just completely random stats. So you have control over your character creation. So you also have traits. We're going to have talents. So we have kind of, skills involved as well. And you're looking at your character creation should be relatively quick as far as comparing it to, say, Pathfinder 2nd Edition or 5th Edition Dungeons and Dragons. There is enough in here that you can create characters that really do stand out and are unique, unlike some games where, you're sort of, you're just a fighter. That is not the case. That's usually not the case with D100 games as well. Also, outside of your percentile dice, you are going to want to have your own standard role-playing dice. Your D4s, your D8s, D12s, D20, D10, so, and of course, D6. So essentially, we have the mechanics are known as the clash system. And essentially, you're looking at rolling your skill or less on percentile dice to succeed. Easy peasy. That's usually how D100 games work. There are some modifiers to difficulty. So you're going to either add or subtract. There is no like advantage dice or anything like that. But there is an interesting wrinkle in these mechanics, and that is the criticals and the fumbles. So if you roll your dice and you get doubles and it's at or below your skill, then that's a critical success. If you roll doubles and you are over your skill, then that is a critical failure. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Also, rolls of 91 to 100 are failures. So when you're using your skills, which I thought that was kind of interesting because it's basically saying regardless of how easy the task could be, if it's something you're rolling dice for, there is a possibility of failure. So we get some more artwork here as well. We've got combat. Combat is relatively simple, although we do have a few different aspects that we do have to keep in mind. So we have valor points. So we have valor and we also have wounds. And you can lose valor points. And that's actually what you'll lose first as far as damage. And then once you lose your valor points, then you're going to take wounds. So we have ambushes, initiative, morale. There is a firm belief, which, of course, I am a old school role-playing game fan. I am a firm believer in morale. No intelligent creature is going to fight to the last individual. I was going to say last man, but if they're a creature, they would be a man. So the combat rounds, talking about you've got movement, you can take actions, you've got your attacks. We have criticals and fumbles in combat, of course. Then something else that I thought is kind of cool is we have these like clash. The clash mechanics is kind of the whole mechanical range of the D100. But in combat, you can have actually opposed actions. So as opposed, no pun intended, to sitting there, well, I take my turn, I attack, okay, then the enemy attacks, and going in initiative order, you can actually be opposing an attack, which has a very kind of thematic feel to it, where, you know, the clash of arms, right? So I definitely dig that, where it's not you're attacking and the defender's just waiting and then the defender attacks. You could both be fighting and it's basically an opposed role. So I like that as well. There are clash points that you can utilize that players will have as well to provide you an opportunity to perform more actions in the combat round, as well as casting spells during combat or rituals during combat as well. And we'll see that when we get into the magic section, which is rites. As I mentioned, I like the artwork, but some of the artwork is just a little on the blander side. There's not tons of artwork as well, like I had mentioned, but some of the artwork is sort of like, okay, well, I guess that's okay. I mean, it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not really inspiring for some of the artwork. So we have the different rites, which are basically your spells. And based upon your culture is what kind of spells you would normally have access to, the kind of magic you would have access to. There are actually quite a few spells in here. And as you can see, the spell information isn't overwhelming either. We do have some stat blocks giving us information about the spells, the casting duration, how long it takes to cast, how long will the spell be in effect, can you cast it in combat, and if so, what kind of clash points you got to spend. But it's not overwhelming. The magic is not overwhelming. I know there are a lot of people out there who are just taken aback by 5th edition or Pathfinder with just not only all the magic spells there are, but also just the wall of text for many of the spells as well. If you follow the Gaming Gang and you see me talk about OSR games, I am a fan of succinct information, bullet points. I don't need 3 pages about a magic missile spell. I just want to know, what does it do? How do you cast it? And let's get to the point. So that is kind of similar to how these spells are presented as well. So then we have leveling up, how you can advance. So another cool aspect about this is talents. So as your character improves and you have the various different skills go up, you have your advancements. Once you start getting over 100%, then you can start taking skill talents. And I thought, that's pretty cool. So we've got some defensive skill talents, knowledge, we've got combat. I thought that was really, really interesting, because what happens now when you have a talent for something that you're rolling for skills, now you get to roll 2 10-sided dice as far as your tens for your percentiles. So you're actually rolling 3 10-sided dice for your percentile dice, and you get to choose from those 2 that are set aside as your tens digits. You get to choose which one you want. I thought that was very cool. I thought that's very, very interesting with this as well. So as I mentioned, there's no like advantage where you're rolling a couple of dice and okay, there's no disadvantage either. So it's not like, oh, I roll the dice and I take the best with advantage, or I've got disadvantage. I roll 2 dice. I take the worst. No, but there is the talents. I thought that's kind of cool. So then we've got the Gazetteer, which isn't really long, but it gives you good flavor for this setting. And one thing is that the setting for Jackals really is drawn from ancient history. I like that you really do get that sort of feeling that this is more historical, even though it's still fantasy. It's more historical than say Runequest would be or Glorantha would be, because those are fantasy worlds. They have fantasy races. This does not. And now that's not to say that we don't have creatures and monsters and non-humans. Yes, we do. But it's just those tend to be creatures of chaos. So then we get into the game master facing info, the lore master, as they're referred to in this game. And we get some charts. We get more information about some of the locations. We get corruption rules, which I mentioned before. We have chaos. Chaos is corrupting. So we have Mars of corruption, power of corruption, so on and so forth. So we got various different charts for that. But once again, this is a relatively rules light game. I mean, a lot of these tables that are being introduced are basically, you would use them on occasion once in a while. You're not talking about constantly. We've got the magic items and treasure. I do want to point out the magic items section is pretty slim. There's not a whole lot to it. But then again, this is kind of a low magic setting. So we got hirelings as well. And then we're going to start jumping into the bestiary. Let me get to that. There is some domain play in here that I thought was kind of cool as well. So having, establishing your home base for the Jackals. So we get into the bestiary, and this is what I was talking about, where there isn't a ton of artwork. Yes, some of these entries are for, regular creatures, regular animals, but there are quite a few that are not, that are mythic or fictional, of course, and we don't have artwork, and that's a little disappointing. But then we'll get into a section here in just a sec where all of a sudden we've got quite a bit of artwork popping up right here. So it's like, okay, so why didn't we have more of that early on in the bestiary? Still pretty decent artwork, kind of cool. Then we get a trio of adventures to finish up with. These are pretty short adventures. I can't see them going more than a couple of sessions, if that. And they're not like overwhelming by any stretch of the imagination. These are, of course, for starting characters, but they're pretty good. They're actually pretty good. So to kind of introduce you to the game, as you can see, there's a bit of like a kind of a dungeon delve vibe to the adventures as well. Then we get into our appendix. We're going to have our glossary. We've got our character sheet here. So we've got, this is where you're going to track your wounds and your valor points. And we get into a glossary and our index. And that, in essence, is Jackals from Osprey Games. Let me swing on over to the other camera here, and I will give you my final thoughts and give this a review score. So, if you are interested in Bronze Age role-playing, which has a real specific kind of feel to it, it is not your typical fantasy role-playing games. When you have like Bronze Age is more along the lines of, okay, so we're talking, BC or early AD. That's kind of the feel that you get. Bronze Age tends to have a little more of a historical flavor to it. You don't tend to have a lot of the fantasy races, although RuneQuest does. So if you are looking for kind of a grittier feel, more of a historical feel for a role-playing game, then Bronze Age role-playing is something you should take a peek at. I happen to be a fan of sword and sorcery stories where not everybody knows magic. Magic is hidden, it's secretive. People guard their magical knowledge. This is the sort of setting like that. The rules are pretty straightforward. There were a couple of times that I thought the rules could be presented a little better. And there's some things where you're kind of like, well, wait a second, that's kind of conflicting with what I just read. So as an example, with the rolls of 91 to 100 being an automatic failure, that's not for everything. So that was something that kind of threw me off, because I read where it says, oh yeah, 91 to 100 is a failure. Okay. But then in combat, that's not necessarily the case. So there are some other situations where those failures and I should say failure on 91 to 100 is automatic. It's not always the case. So that kind of threw me a little bit. But for the most part, the rules are pretty easy to get into, especially if you already have some experience with D100 or percentile-based role-playing games. All right. So the big elephant in the room is, if you're looking at doing a Bronze Age role-playing game, why would you purchase Jackals as opposed to RuneQuest or any number of role-playing game systems that utilize Greg Stafford's Glorantha, which you've got decades of material for? I'll explain. If you're looking for kind of more of a historical vibe, then RuneQuest may not be, or Glorantha, we'll just say Glorantha, may not be your bag of tricks, because there are different fantasy races. You can be a duck, which actually, I remember when I first picked up RuneQuest, when that came out in the US, I thought, man, that's really weird. And then I warmed to the idea. So you don't have any anthropomorphic ducks in Jackals. Something else to keep in mind is if you are looking at Glorantha, there is a pretty hefty investment you need to make. And I'm not necessarily talking monetarily. There is so much lore. There is so much background. There is so much going on in Glorantha, in that setting, that you really need to make a time investment as not only as a game master, but as a player to really get the most out of it. Jackals gives you enough background information about the setting to really give you a good flavor. But all in all, the Gazetteer is like 30 pages. The information about cultures, all in all, another 20 pages or so. So there isn't that same sort of investment you have to make into the game to get started with it. And I really do appreciate that quite a bit. I like it. I think this is a very good alternative. If especially if you are looking for something even like in like a biblical sense, if you wanted to utilize these rules, toss out some of the magic, some of the rituals in that, I could certainly see that as well. Now, I do know there is like a mega campaign that is coming out. It's coming out in a couple of weeks or less than 2 weeks. It's the Fall of the Children of Bronze, and it is supposed to be like 14 adventures over a period of 9 years. So we are seeing some support for Jackals, because that is a concern that I've got, because Osprey Games has so many different releases, especially as far as like miniatures rules, that some of the role-playing games don't seem to get a ton of support. That seems like that might change with Jackals, because we do have that additional supplement coming very soon. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give Jackals a very solid 8.5. Yes, I got some quibbles with it. Not enough artwork. Some of the artwork's not super inspiring. Some of the rules presentation seems to conflict a little bit, or at least it's not presented as crystal clear as I would have liked. But I do really think that Jackals makes for a nice option as far as low fantasy, Bronze Age role-playing, as opposed to some systems that are already out there and established. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do, ding that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday through Thursday nights right here on YouTube, as I not only bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news, but also first looks at board games, role-playing games, miniatures games. I did a first look at Jackals on an episode of the Dispatch. So by all means, check that out. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for taking time out to watch this video, and I'll see you next time. Oh, you're still here. Well, while you're kicking it, how about subscribing to the Gaming Gang channel, or seeing the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, or finding out what YouTube recommends you check out here at my channel. And of course, don't forget, get your geek on at thegaminggang.com.